The dusty trail stretched endlessly ahead as Caleb. Harrison guided his horse through the rocky terrain of the Arizona Territory. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. His weathered hands gripped the reins tightly, his mind focused on the task ahead. Yes. The new sheriff of Copper Ridge had been called to investigate reports of cattle rustling in the area. The small town needed law and order. Caleb was determined to provide it. He had spent years as a deputy in various frontier settlements, earning a reputation for his fair but firm approach to justice. His tall frame and steady demeanor commanded respect, while his keen eyes missed nothing in his surroundings. As he crested a hill, movement in the valley below caught his attention. A lone figure struggled with what appeared to be a broken wagon wheel. Caleb squinted against the bright sunlight, making out the form of a woman in a faded blue dress. Her dark hair had escaped its pins, falling in waves around her shoulders as she worked desperately to fix the damaged wheel. Without hesitation, Caleb spurred his horse down the slope toward the stranded traveler. As he drew closer, he could see the woman's distress more clearly. Her hands were dirty from her attempts to repair the wheel, and tears of frustration glistened in her eyes. She looked up at his approach, her body tensing with obvious fear. The woman stepped back from the wagon, her arms crossing protectively over her chest. She had learned to be wary of strangers, especially men traveling alone in these remote areas. Her experiences had taught her that kindness was often a mask for darker intentions. Caleb dismounted slowly, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way she positioned herself to flee if necessary. He had encountered frightened people before, and he understood the importance of earning their trust through actions rather than words. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Harrison," he said quietly, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Looks like you could use some help with that wheel." The woman studied him carefully, taking in his badge and the honest expression on his weathered face. Something in his manner seemed different from other men she had encountered. There was a gentleness in his approach that surprised her, though she remained cautious. "I can manage," she replied, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. The wheel was clearly beyond her ability to repair. The sun would soon begin its descent toward the horizon. Caleb nodded respectfully, not moving closer, despite her obvious need for assistance. "I'm sure you can, but it would be my pleasure to help. These desert nights can be dangerous for someone traveling alone." He waited patiently for her response, understanding that trust had to be earned. The woman looked between him and her broken wagon, weighing her options. Eventually, practical necessity won out over her fears. "My name is Rebecca," she said quietly. "Rebecca Stone. I was heading to Copper Ridge when this happened." Caleb smiled warmly at her introduction. "Well, Miss Stone, you're in luck. That's exactly where I'm headed. Let me take a look at this wheel." He approached the wagon slowly, giving Rebecca plenty of space to feel comfortable. As he examined the damage, he noticed several personal belongings scattered inside the wagon. Bed, a few dresses, some books, and what appeared to be medical supplies suggested she might be a teacher or perhaps someone with healing skills. The wheel had suffered more damage than could be easily repaired on the trail. The wooden spokes were cracked, and the iron rim had come loose. Caleb ran his hand through his hair, considering their options. "This is going to need proper tools and materials," he explained. "More than I have with me out here." Rebecca's face fell at this news. She had been traveling for days, and Copper Ridge represented a new beginning for her. The thought of being stranded in the desert filled her with dread. Caleb noticed her distress and quickly continued. "But don't worry, I can fashion a temporary fix that should get us to town. Won't be comfortable, but it'll hold." He began gathering stones from the surrounding area, along with some sturdy branches from a nearby scrub oak. His movements were efficient and practiced, showing his familiarity with frontier problem-solving. As he worked, Rebecca found herself studying this unexpected rescuer. Most men she had encountered demanded something in return for their help, but Sheriff Harrison seemed genuinely concerned only with her welfare. His calloused hands worked skillfully, and she could see the concentration in his blue eyes as he tackled the repair. "Are you new to Copper Ridge?" Caleb asked as he secured the makeshift support for the wheel. "Yes," Rebecca replied, relaxing. Slightly as they talked, "I'm hoping to find work there. Have some experience with healing and teaching." Caleb looked up from his work with interest. The town could certainly use both. Doc Miller is getting on in years, and the schoolmarm left last month to get married. The prospect of useful employment lifted Rebecca's spirits considerably. Her decision to come west had been the right choice after all. She had left behind a difficult situation, hoping to find independence and purpose in a new place. As the temporary repair took shape, Caleb explained what he was doing, treating Rebecca as an equal rather than someone helpless. This respectful approach was something she had rarely experienced, and it began to ease her initial wariness. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when Caleb finally stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. The makeshift repair looked sturdy, enough to complete their journey, though it would require careful driving. "That should hold," he said with satisfaction. "We'll need to take it slow, but we should reach town before dark if we leave soon." Rebecca felt a wave of gratitude toward this kind stranger who had appeared at exactly the right moment. His willingness to help without expecting anything in return was a revelation to her as they prepared to continue their journey together. Neither Rebecca nor Caleb could have imagined how this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. The road to Copper Ridge stretched ahead, carrying them toward a destiny neither had anticipated when the day began. The journey to Copper Ridge proceeded slowly, with Caleb leading his horse while walking alongside Rebecca's wagon. The makeshift repair held steady, though every bump and rut in the trail required careful navigation. They traveled mostly in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. Rebecca found herself stealing glances at her rescuer as they moved along the dusty path. His easy stride and confident manner spoke of someone comfortable in this harsh environment, yet there was something gentle about him that set her at ease. Despite her usual wariness around strangers, as the afternoon wore on, Caleb began sharing stories about Copper Ridge and its residents. He spoke of the local shopkeeper, who extended credit to struggling families, the blacksmith who never charged widows for his services, and the preacher who doubled as the town's barber. His affection for the community was evident in every word. "Sounds like a good place," Rebecca commented, guiding her horse around a particularly large rock in the path. "It is," Caleb agreed. "The people look out for each other. It's important out here, where everyone depends on their neighbors." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. The idea of belonging to a real community appealed to her greatly. She had spent too many years feeling isolated and alone, never quite fitting in anywhere she tried to settle, as they crested another hill. The town of Copper Ridge spread out before them in the valley below. Wooden buildings lined a main street that bustled with evening activity. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the warm glow of oil lamps began to twinkle in windows as dusk approached. "There she is," Caleb said with obvious pride. "Home." The word struck Rebecca unexpectedly. She had not had a place she could truly call home in many years. Now the sight of the welcoming little town stirred something hopeful within her chest. Made their way down the main street, drawing curious looks from the townspeople. Caleb raised his hand in greeting to various residents who responded with warm waves and friendly calls. It was clear that the sheriff was well liked and respected in the community. Rebecca noticed how the people's expressions changed when they saw her. There was curiosity, certainly, but also a welcoming warmth that she had rarely experienced as a newcomer to any place. Called out a portly man from the steps of what appeared to be the general store. "Who's your traveling companion?" Caleb guided them to a stop in front of the store. "Pete, I'd like you to meet Miss Rebecca Stone. Her wagon broke down on the trail. She's looking to settle in Copper Ridge." Pete's round face broke into a broad smile. "Oh, Miss Stone, welcome to our town. I'm Pete Wilson, and this here's my store. Anything you need, just let me know." The genuine friendliness in his voice brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. She had grown so accustomed to suspicion and cold treatment that this warm reception overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she managed, her voice slightly thick with emotion. "That's very kind." Caleb noticed her reaction and felt a protective surge within his chest. There was clearly more to Rebecca's story than she had shared, and he found himself wanting to ensure she felt safe and welcome in his town. "Pete, Miss Stone has experience with healing and teaching, Caleb mentioned. I told her the town could use both. Pete's eyes lit up with excitement. Doc Miller will be thrilled to hear that. And with Mrs. Patterson gone, we've been wondering what to do about the school. This is wonderful news. As word of the newcomer spread, more townspeople began to gather around the wagon. Each introduction brought more warm welcomes and offers of assistance. Rebecca felt almost dizzy with the unexpected kindness being shown to her. Martha Jenkins, the baker's wife, stepped forward with a concerned expression. Where will you be staying tonight, dear? The boarding house is full up with traveling merchants this week. Before Rebecca could express her worry about this development, Caleb spoke up. There's a small room behind the jail that's clean and comfortable. Miss Stone is welcome to use it until she finds permanent lodging. Rebecca turned to him with surprise and gratitude. That's very generous, but I couldn't impose. Nonsense, Caleb replied firmly. It's the sheriff's job to look after folks. In need, besides, it's just sitting empty, as the crowd began to disperse, with promises to visit again soon. Caleb helped Rebecca move her belongings to the small room behind the jail. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small table by the single window. It's not fancy, but it's safe, Caleb said as he set down her traveling bag. Rebecca looked around the modest space and felt more gratitude than she had experienced in years. It's perfect. Thank you for everything today, Sheriff Harrison. Don't know what I would have done without your help. Caleb touched the brim of his hat respectfully. Just Caleb, please, and you would have managed just fine? You strike me as a resourceful woman. His words carried a respect that Rebecca had rarely heard from any man. Most treated her as either helpless or suspicious, but Caleb seemed to see her as simply another person deserving of courtesy and assistance. I'll let you get settled, he continued. Martha's bakery opens early, and she makes the best coffee in 3 territories. I'd recommend starting your day there. After Caleb left, Rebecca sat on the small bed and tried to process everything that had happened. The kindness of these strangers felt almost too good to be true. Her past experiences had taught her to be wary of generosity, as it often came, with hidden costs, but something about Caleb and the people of Copper Ridge felt different. Their warmth seemed genuine, without the undercurrents of expectation or judgment she had grown accustomed to encountering as she prepared for sleep. Rebecca found herself thinking about the sheriff who had rescued her. His respectful manner and genuine concern were so different from what she had experienced with other men. For the first time in years, she felt a tiny spark of hope that perhaps she had finally found a place where she could build a new life. Outside her window, the sounds of the town settling in for the night created a peaceful soundtrack. Dogs barked in the distance, and she could hear the gentle murmur of conversation from the saloon down the street. It was the sound of a living, breathing community, and Rebecca felt her heart warming to the possibility of becoming part of it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she tried to establish herself in Copper Ridge, but tonight she felt safer and more hopeful than she had in many months. Dawn broke over Copper Ridge with the promise of a new beginning for Rebecca. She had slept better than she had in months, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. The morning sun streamed through her small window, casting golden light across the simple room that had become her temporary sanctuary. Following Caleb's advice, she made her way to the bakery, where the aroma of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. Martha Jenkins greeted her with a warm smile and a steaming cup of the promised coffee, along with a fresh roll that melted in her mouth. "Sleep well, dear?" Martha asked, her motherly concern evident in her kind eyes. "Better than I have in a long time," Rebecca admitted, surprised by her own honesty with this near-dash stranger. As she sipped her coffee, other early risers trickled into the bakery. Each one greeted her warmly, asking about her plans and offering assistance. The genuine interest and kindness continued to amaze Rebecca, who had grown accustomed to suspicious stares and whispered conversations. Dr. Miller arrived while she was finishing her breakfast. He was an elderly man with silver hair and gentle hands that spoke of years dedicated to healing others. His examination of her medical knowledge was thorough but kind, and his face lit up with approval as she demonstrated her understanding of various treatments and remedies. "My dear, you're a godsend," he said finally. I've been praying for someone to help shoulder the burden of caring for this community. These old bones aren't as reliable as they once were. The school committee was equally enthusiastic about her. Teaching credentials, they arranged to meet that afternoon to discuss curriculum and schedules. Expressing their relief at having found someone so quickly after their previous teacher's departure, by midday, Rebecca had been offered both positions. The combination of part-time teaching and assisting Dr. Miller would provide her with sufficient income to support herself while allowing her to serve the community in meaningful ways. As she walked back toward the jail to share her good news with Caleb, she noticed a commotion near the general store. A group of rough-looking men had ridden into town, and their presence seemed to have put everyone on edge. She quickened her pace, instinctively seeking the safety of the sheriff's presence. She found Caleb standing in the doorway of his office, watching the newcomers with careful attention. His relaxed demeanor from the previous day had been replaced by the alert stance of a lawman sensing trouble. "Who are they?" Rebecca asked quietly, joining him in the doorway. "Trouble," Caleb replied simply, his hand resting casually near his gun. "That's Jake Morrison and his gang. They've been causing problems throughout the territory." Rebecca felt a familiar chill of fear run down her spine. She had encountered men like these before, and the memories were not pleasant ones. Without thinking, she stepped closer to Caleb. Seeking the safety of his protective presence, Caleb noticed her reaction and felt his protective instincts flare. Something in Rebecca's past had taught her to fear such men, and he found himself determined to ensure she never had to feel that fear again while she was under his protection. "Stay close to me," he said quietly, his voice carrying both authority and comfort. The gang members were clearly testing the town's response to their presence. They made a show of examining merchandise at the general store while speaking loudly about their recent activities in nearby settlements. Their words were carefully chosen to intimidate without crossing into outright threats. Caleb stepped onto the wooden sidewalk, his badge catching the sunlight. His movement was casual but deliberate, making his presence known without appearing aggressive. The subtle message was clear to anyone experienced in frontier law enforcement: Jake Morrison. A tall man with cruel eyes and an unkempt beard noticed the sheriff's appearance. He smiled coldly and dismounted his horse, swagger in every step. As he approached, Sheriff Morrison said with mock respect, touching his hat brim in an exaggerated gesture, "Nice little town you have here. You like it?" Caleb replied evenly, his stance relaxed but ready. "Planning to stay long?" Morrison's smile widened, revealing yellowed teeth. "That depends on how hospitable folks are. We might need to rest our horses, get some supplies." The underlying threat in his words was unmistakable. Rebecca felt her heart racing as she watched the dangerous dance of words between the two men. She had seen similar confrontations before, and they rarely ended well. For honest people trying to live peaceful lives, the store's open for business, Caleb said calmly. Pete treats all customers fairly, as long as they behave themselves. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly at the subtle warning embedded in Caleb's words. He glanced around the street, noting how the townspeople had quietly positioned themselves within easy reach of doorways and cover. The message was clear. This community would stand together if threatened. "Of course, Sheriff. We're law-abiding citizens just like everyone else." Mockery in Morrison's voice made Rebecca's skin crawl, but Caleb seemed unimpressed by the attempt at intimidation. His steady gaze never wavered from the outlaw's face. "Glad to hear it," Caleb replied. "Enjoy your visit." Morrison held his gaze for a long moment before turning away with a harsh laugh. As he walked back to his men, Rebecca noticed how Caleb remained completely still until the gang members had mounted their horses and ridden to the far end of town. "Are they leaving?" she asked hopefully. Caleb shook his head grimly. "They'll camp somewhere nearby and come back tonight," men like Morrison don't give up easily when they think they've found easy prey. Rebecca felt her stomach clench with familiar dread. She had hoped that coming to Copper Ridge would mean leaving such dangers behind, but it seemed trouble had a way of finding her wherever she went. "What will you do?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "My job," Caleb replied simply. "Protect this town and its people." The quiet determination in his voice both comforted and worried Rebecca. She had seen what men like Morrison were capable of, and the thought of Caleb facing them alone filled her with unexpected fear for his safety. "Maybe I should leave," she said quietly. "Find somewhere else to settle." Caleb turned to look at her. With surprise and something that might have been disappointment. "Why would you do that?" Rebecca struggled to put her feelings into words without revealing too much about her past. "I don't want to bring trouble to people who have been so kind to me." Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. Whatever Rebecca had experienced before coming to Copper Ridge, it had taught her to believe that she was somehow responsible for the violence that seemed to follow her. "Rebecca," he said gently, "you're not responsible for men like Morrison existing, and you're not running them out of town by being here." His words struck something deep within her heart. For years, she had carried the burden of believing that she somehow attracted trouble, that her presence put others at risk. "This town needs you," Caleb continued. "Dr. Miller, the school children, all of us. Don't let fear drive you away. From the life you deserve." As Rebecca looked into his honest eyes, she felt something shift within her chest. Perhaps it was time to stop running and start believing that she deserved a place to call home. As evening approached, tension settled over Copper Ridge like a heavy blanket. The townspeople went about their usual business, but Rebecca could sense the underlying nervousness in their movements. Mothers called their children inside earlier than usual, and men lingered near their homes instead of gathering at the saloon for their customary evening conversations. Caleb spent the afternoon making quiet rounds, speaking with various residents and ensuring they were prepared for whatever the night might bring. He checked with Pete at the general store, confirmed that Dr. Miller had secured his medical supplies, and made sure the banker had properly locked his vault. Rebecca tried to keep busy by organizing her few belongings and reviewing the teaching materials the school committee had provided. But her concentration kept drifting to the window, watching for any sign of Morrison and his men returning to town, as darkness began to fall. Caleb appeared at her door with a serious expression. "I need to ask you to stay inside tonight," he said quietly. "Lock the door and don't open it for anyone except me." The gravity in his voice sent a shiver of fear through Rebecca. She had hoped that perhaps Morrison's gang would simply move on to easier targets, but Caleb's precautions suggested otherwise. "What about you?" she asked, surprised by how much his safety had come to matter to her in such a short time. "Be making rounds, keeping an eye on things," he replied. "This is my town, Rebecca. These are my people. I won't let anything happen to them." She could see the weight of responsibility in his shoulders, the burden of protecting an entire community. It reminded her of her own sense of duty, the calling she felt to heal and teach those in need. "Be careful," she whispered, the words carrying more emotion than she had intended. Caleb's expression softened at her concern. "I will. And Rebecca, whatever happens tonight, remember that you belong here now. This is your home too." Left, Rebecca tried to follow his instructions and stay safely inside. But as the hours passed and the sounds of normal evening activity faded into ominous silence, her anxiety grew unbearable. She had never been good at hiding while others faced danger on her behalf. Near midnight, the sound of horses' hooves echoed. Through the empty streets, Becca peered carefully through her curtain and saw Morrison's gang riding slowly down the main street, their movements deliberately intimidating. They seemed to be testing the town's response, looking for signs of weakness or fear. Caleb emerged from the shadows near the bank, his hand resting on his gun. Even from her window, Rebecca could see the tension in his stance as he faced the mounted outlaws alone. "Evening, Sheriff," Morrison called out mockingly. "Quiet night for a patrol. Quiet's how we like it in Copper Ridge," Caleb replied steadily. "Time for you boys to move along." Morrison laughed harshly. "We're just enjoying the hospitality of your fine town. Maybe we'll camp here for a few days, get to know the local folks better." The threat was unmistakable. Rebecca's heart pounded as she watched the dangerous confrontation unfold. She could see other townspeople peering from their windows, but no one came forward to stand with their sheriff. The weight of protecting everyone rested entirely on Caleb's shoulders. "I think you've enjoyed our hospitality enough," Caleb said firmly. "Time to ride out." One of Morrison's men spat contemptuously into the dust. "What if we don't feel like leaving, Sheriff?" What's one man going to do against all of us? Rebecca saw Caleb's hand move closer to his weapon, and her blood ran cold. The odds were impossibly unfair. She couldn't bear the thought of watching him face such danger alone, without allowing herself time to reconsider. Rebecca quietly slipped out her door and made her way through the shadows toward the main street. Her heart hammered in her chest. But she couldn't abandon the man who had shown her such kindness. As she approached the confrontation, she could hear the menace in Morrison's voice growing stronger. "You know, Sheriff, we've been hearing interesting things about your town. Seems you folks might have something worth taking." "The only thing worth having here is the peace we've worked hard to build," Caleb replied. "And I won't let you disturb." That, Morrison's cruel laugh cut through the night air. "Peace doesn't put gold in a man's pocket, Sheriff, but I bet that bank of yours has plenty that would." Rebecca reached the edge of the main street and saw the full scope of the threat. Morrison's gang had spread out to surround Caleb, cutting off his escape routes. The sheriff stood alone in the center of the street, outnumbered, but refusing to back down. Her mind raced as she considered her options. She had no weapon, no way to physically help in a gunfight, but she did have knowledge that might prove valuable. In her bag were medical supplies, and she knew how to use them. If shooting started, people would need help. More importantly, she realized that her presence might complicate Morrison's plans. The outlaw leader clearly enjoyed intimidating isolated targets. But witnesses could be problematic for men who preferred to operate in shadows. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Rebecca stepped out of the shadows and into the moonlit street. Her sudden appearance caused several of the gang members to turn in surprise. "Sheriff Harrison," she called out in a clear, steady voice that surprised even herself. "Is everything all right?" Caleb's eyes widened with a mixture of concern and admiration. At her unexpected courage, "Miss Stone, you should be inside." "I heard voices and wanted to make sure everyone was safe," she replied. Moving closer despite the obvious danger, Morrison studied this new development with calculating eyes. A witness changed the dynamic of the situation, especially one who looked like a respectable woman. Too many questions would be asked if something happened to someone like her. Well, Morrison said with false charm, "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Miss Rebecca Stone," Caleb answered protectively, stepping slightly closer to her. "The town's new teacher and healer." The respect in Caleb's voice when he spoke of her touched Rebecca deeply. Even in this dangerous moment, he introduced her. With pride, acknowledging her value to the community, Morrison's expression showed his displeasure at this complication. A respected member of the community was not someone who could simply disappear without causing significant problems for anyone involved. "Teacher, Morrison said thoughtfully. "That's mighty noble work, ma'am. Important to the whole community, I'd imagine." Rebecca recognized the subtle threat in his words but refused to show fear. "The children here deserve the best education possible," she replied firmly. "And the people deserve to feel safe in their own town." Her quiet courage seemed to give strength to others. Windows that had been dark began to show the flicker of oil lamps, as townspeople realized their sheriff was not facing the threat alone. Caleb felt a surge of pride and protectiveness as he watched Rebecca face down these dangerous men without flinching. Her bravery was inspiring others to show their support. Changing the balance of the confrontation, Morrison sensed the shift in momentum and knew his advantage was slipping away. What had seemed like an easy target was becoming more complicated by the moment. "Seems like you folks take your community responsibilities seriously," he said with grudging respect. "That's admirable." The acknowledgement felt like a small victory, but Rebecca knew the danger was far from over. Men like Morrison rarely gave up their plans without some form of compensation or face-saving gesture. The standoff continued for several tense minutes as Morrison weighed his options. Rebecca could see the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the changed dynamics of the situation. What had begun as an opportunity to intimidate an isolated lawman had evolved into something more complex. More lights began to appear in windows throughout the town, as word spread quietly from house to house. Pete Wilson emerged from his store with a shotgun, followed by the blacksmith and several other men. They positioned themselves strategically along the street, creating a show of unified resistance. Looks like your whole town's having trouble. Sleeping tonight, Sheriff? Morrison observed, his tone carrying less mockery than before. Caleb allowed himself a small smile of pride in his community. Copper Ridge folks, look out for each other. That's how we've built something worth protecting. Rebecca felt a warmth spread through her chest at being included in that protective circle. For the first time in years, she truly felt part of something larger than herself. Morrison's horse pawed the ground restlessly, sensing his rider's indecision. The outlaw leader had built his reputation on quick, decisive strikes against unprepared targets. But this town was proving to be anything but unprepared. You know, Morrison said finally, his voice taking on a different tone, maybe we've been too hasty in our judgment of your hospitality. Rebecca tensed, recognizing the shift in his approach. Predators often change tactics when direct intimidation failed to achieve their goals. Perhaps, Morrison continued, we could work out some kind of arrangement, small tax you might say, for the protection we could provide against other, less reasonable groups that might pass through. The protection racket proposal hung in the air like poison. Rebecca had seen communities destroyed by such arrangements, where payments were never enough and demands always escalated. Caleb's response was immediate and firm. Copper Ridge doesn't need that kind of protection. We take care of ourselves. Morrison's, a facade of reasonableness, began to crack. That's a shame, Sheriff, because there are worse things than my boys riding through these parts. Much worse. The threat was barely veiled now, but it revealed something important about Morrison's position. He was not operating from a place of strength if he felt the need to invoke other dangers. Rebecca noticed something else in Morrison's manner that others might have missed. There was a desperation beneath his bravado, a sense that this opportunity was important to him in ways that went beyond simple greed. Taking a calculated risk, she spoke up again. Mr. Morrison, you mentioned that times have been hard. Perhaps. What you and your men really need is honest work rather than the uncertain life you're living now. Morrison's eyes snapped to her with surprise and anger. Lady, you don't know what you're talking about. But Rebecca pressed on, her instincts as a healer recognizing a wounded soul beneath the criminal exterior. I know what it's like to feel. Like you don't have choices, to feel like the world has pushed you into a corner with no way out. Caleb watched in amazement as Rebecca approached the dangerous outlaw, not with fear, but with the same compassion she might show to any suffering person who came to her for help. The difference is, Rebecca continued gently, I was fortunate enough to find people who showed me there were other paths available, better paths. Morrison's expression shifted from anger to something more vulnerable. For just a moment, the mask of the hardened criminal slipped, revealing the frightened and desperate man beneath. It's too late for that kind of thinking, lady, he said quietly. Some lines, once you cross them, you can't go back. Rebecca felt her heart ache for the pain she heard in his voice. It's never too late to choose differently. These people, she gestured toward the townspeople who had come out to support their sheriff, they believe in second chances. They gave one to me. The silence that followed was charged with possibility. Morrison sat motionless on his horse, staring at Rebecca as if seeing her clearly for the first time. One of his men shifted impatiently in his saddle. Jake, what are we doing here? Let's just take what we came for and go. The interruption shattered the moment of connection. Morrison's face hardened again, the vulnerability disappearing behind familiar walls of anger and defiance. You're right, he said to his man, then turned back to Caleb and Rebecca. This town's got more fight in it than we expected. Don't think this is over. He wheeled his horse around sharply, but paused to look back at Rebecca one more time. Lady, you've got more courage than sense. But you might want to be more careful about who you try to save. Not everyone wants saving. With that, Morrison spurred his horse down the street, his gang following in a thunder of hoofbeats that gradually faded into the distance. The townspeople remained in position for several minutes after the outlaws disappeared, making sure they were truly gone. When Caleb finally gave the all-clear, cheer went up from the gathered residents. Pete Wilson was the first to reach them, clapping Caleb on the shoulder with obvious relief. That was some fine work, Sheriff. Had us all worried there for a while. It wasn't just me, Caleb replied, looking at Rebecca with obvious admiration. Miss Stone here showed more courage than anyone had a right to ask for. Rebecca felt herself blushing at the praise, but also glowing with a sense of accomplishment. For the first time in years, she had stood up to the kind of men who had once made her life a nightmare, and she had not run away. "I couldn't let you face them alone," she said simply. "This is my home now, too." The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Somewhere between her arrival yesterday and this moment of crisis, Copper Ridge had truly become home in her heart. Caleb's eyes met hers in the moonlight, and she saw something profound pass between them. It was more than gratitude or admiration. It was recognition of a deep connection that had formed in the crucible of shared danger. "You were incredible," he said quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. "The way you spoke to Morrison, ... I've never seen anything like it." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at his praise. "I recognized something in him that I've felt myself. Sometimes people do terrible things because they can't see any other way forward. And sometimes," Caleb replied, "stepping closer, they find someone who helps them see that there are always choices, even when it seems impossible." The townspeople began to disperse, turning to their homes with the satisfied air of people who had stood together against a threat and prevailed. But Caleb and Rebecca remained in the street, the connection between them growing stronger in the aftermath of crisis. "I should walk you back," Caleb said. Though neither of them seemed eager to end this moment, they walked slowly toward the jail, neither wanting to break the spell that had settled over them. The night air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of desert blooms that only opened in darkness. "Caleb," Rebecca said as they reached her door, "what you said earlier about this being my home, ... Did you mean it?" We turned to face her fully, his expression serious and honest. "I meant every word. This town is better with you in it, Rebecca. I'm better with you in it." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Rebecca felt her heart racing with emotions she had thought herself incapable of feeling again. "I've never had anyone fight for me before," she whispered. "The way you stood up to Morrison, protected the town, protected me, ... You protected yourself," Caleb replied. "And you've protected all of us by showing Morrison that courage comes in many forms. You changed everything tonight." Rebecca looked up into his kind eyes and felt the last of her defensive walls beginning to crumble. This man had shown her respect, protection, and genuine care without asking for anything in return. He had seen her at her most vulnerable and never once made her feel ashamed or afraid. "I have things in my past," she began hesitantly, "things that might make you think differently about me if you knew them." Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he gently took her hands in his. "Rebecca, I don't care about your past. I care about who you are right now, today, in this moment. And the woman I see is brave, kind, and stronger than she knows." Tears gathered in Rebecca's eyes at his words. No one had ever seen her so clearly or accepted her so completely. Healing she had been searching for all these years was finally within reach. "What Morrison said about some lines being impossible to uncross," she said softly, "I used to believe that about myself. But being here, meeting you, seeing how this community welcomes people, maybe he was wrong." "He was wrong," Caleb said with quiet certainty. "Every day is a chance to choose who we want to be. And I know who you are, Rebecca Stone. You're the woman who stepped into danger to help a friend. You're the healer who sees past people's wounds to their humanity. You're the teacher who believes everyone deserves a second chance." His words washed over her like a healing balm, soothing hurts she had carried for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be without them. As they stood there in the moonlight, Rebecca realized that something fundamental had shifted. Within her, the fear that had driven her from place to place for years had been replaced by something far more powerful: the courage to stay, to build a life, to trust in the possibility of love. 3 months had passed since that pivotal night when Morrison and his gang had threatened Copper Ridge. The changing seasons had brought cooler weather and a harvest festival that celebrated not just the crops, but the community's resilience. In growth, Rebecca had settled into her dual roles as teacher and healer, with remarkable success. The school children adored her patient teaching methods, and Dr. Miller had come to rely on her skilled assistance with increasingly complex cases. More importantly, she had found the sense of belonging she had searched for all her life. Her relationship with Caleb had deepened gradually, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared experiences. They had weathered several smaller crises together, from helping families through illness to mediating disputes between neighbors. Each challenge had strengthened the bond between them and Rebecca's connection to the community. On this particular evening, they walked together along the ridge that gave the town its name, watching the sun set over the desert landscape. Become their favorite place to talk and share their thoughts about the day's events. Mrs. Henderson's baby is doing much better, Rebecca reported, settling onto a fallen log that served as their usual resting spot. The fever finally broke this morning. Caleb smiled with relief. Thanks to your care. Doc Miller was right when he said you were a godsend to this town. Rebecca felt the familiar warmth that came with his praise, though she had gradually learned to accept compliments without the reflexive denial that had once been her response to any positive attention. I love the work, she replied simply. It feels good to use my skills to help people instead of just surviving from day to day. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Rebecca marveled at how peaceful such moments had become for her. Constant anxiety that had once dominated her thoughts had been replaced by a deep contentment she had never imagined possible. Rebecca, Caleb said finally, his voice carrying a note of nervousness that was unusual for him. There's something I've been wanting to ask you. She turned to look at him, noting the serious expression on his face. Her heart began to beat faster, though not with the fear that such intensity had once triggered in her. I know we've talked about your past, he continued, and I meant what I said about it not mattering to me. But I realize there are still things you haven't shared, things that still cause you pain. Rebecca felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She had grown comfortable sharing many aspects of her history with Caleb, but there were still depths of shame and hurt that she had never revealed to anyone. Whatever happened to you before you came here, Caleb continued gently, I want you to know that you're safe now, completely safe. And if you ever want to tell me about it, I'll listen without judgment. The kindness in his voice nearly brought tears to her eyes. Over the months, she had gradually shared pieces of her story, the years of moving from town to town, the reasons she had learned to be so careful around strangers, the events that had taught her to trust no one completely. But there was one part of her past that she had never spoken aloud, one source of shame that had driven her restless wandering more than any other. Looking into Caleb's honest face, she felt the courage to finally voice the truth that had haunted her for years. There was a man, she began quietly, her hands trembling slightly. In a town called Millfield about 2 years ago. He seemed kind. At first respectable, he was the mayor's son, well regarded by everyone. Caleb remained silent, giving her the space to continue at her own pace. His steady presence gave her strength to push through the difficult memories. He pursued me persistently, claiming to want to marry me. I was working as a seamstress then, trying to save money for a better life somewhere else. When I refused his advances, he became ... aggressive. Rebecca paused, struggling with the weight of old fear and shame. Caleb reached for her hand, offering silent support without pressuring her to continue. One night he cornered me when I was walking home from work, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He tried to ... he wanted to force himself on me. During the struggle, I managed to push him away, but he fell and struck his head on a rock. Caleb's grip on her hand tightened slightly, offering comfort while his expression remained carefully neutral. He was unconscious but breathing when I left, Rebecca rushed to explain. I didn't know how badly he was hurt, but I knew no one would believe my version of events over his. So I ran. I left town that very night with nothing but the clothes on my back. The confession hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Rebecca held her breath, waiting for Caleb's reaction, fearing that even he might see her differently now that he knew the full truth. Rebecca, Caleb said finally, his voice filled with gentle strength. You defended yourself against someone who was trying to hurt you. There's no shame in that. The simple acceptance in his words broke something open inside her chest. She had held back for years began to flow freely. But what if I killed him? She whispered through her tears. What if he never woke up? I've been running ever since, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid someone would come looking for a murderess. Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her gently while she sobbed out years of accumulated fear and guilt. His strong hands stroked her hair as he murmured words of comfort and reassurance. "You're not a murderess," he said firmly when her tears began to subside. "You're a survivor. And whatever happened to that man, it wasn't murder, it was self-defense." Rebecca pulled back to look at him through her tears. "How can you be so certain?" "Because I know you," he replied simply. "I've seen your heart, Rebecca. I've watched you care for sick children and comfort grieving families. I've seen how you treat everyone with kindness and respect. That's not the heart of someone capable of cold-blooded violence." His words began to penetrate the wall of shame she had built around that terrible night. For the first time since it happened, she allowed herself to consider that perhaps she had done nothing wrong. "Even if the worst had happened," Caleb continued, "it would have been because you were protecting yourself from someone who meant you harm. That's not something to run from. That's something to be proud of." Rebecca felt something shift deep. Inside her chest, like a door that had been locked for years finally opening, the constant fear that had driven her from town to town was beginning to lose its power over her. "I want to find out," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. "I want to know what really happened to him." Caleb studied her face carefully. "Are you sure?" "That kind of knowledge can't be undone once you have it." Rebecca thought about his questions seriously. The uncertainty had been a poison in her system. For years, coloring every relationship and preventing her from ever feeling truly safe anywhere. "I need to know," she said with growing conviction. "I can't build a future on a foundation of fear and uncertainty." "We're going to," she trailed off, suddenly shy about voicing her hopes for their relationship. "If we're going to build a life together," Caleb finished gently. Rebecca's heart leaped at his words. "Is that what you want? Even knowing everything about my past? Especially knowing everything about your past?" He replied with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Rebecca Stone, I want to build a life with you. I want to marry you, raise children with you, grow old beside you. Your past doesn't change that. It's part of what made you the incredible woman you are today." The proposal was so simple and honest that it took her breath away. No grand gestures or flowery speeches, just a straightforward declaration from a man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to love her anyway. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I want all of that too." As Caleb kissed her under the star-filled desert sky, Rebecca realized that her long journey of running and hiding had finally led her home. Whatever the future held, whatever truths they might uncover about her past, she would face them with this good man beside her, the woman who had once begged a stranger not to lift. Her skirt had found someone who valued far more than her body. He treasured her mind, her heart, and her wounded but healing soul. In saving her from that broken wagon wheel, Sheriff Caleb Harrison had ultimately saved her from a life of fear and loneliness, placing it with love, purpose, and the promise of a tomorrow worth embracing.